GMO Free Idaho. This is Jenny, and I'm here with Phil Geertson, formerly of Geertson Seeds, and we're going to talk to him a little bit about his alfalfa seed business and some information that he has about GMOs and what it's done in his area of expertise. So Phil, can you talk a little bit about the alfalfa seed export business that you were running?
Well, yes, the United States, for the first or the last half of the last century, produced most of the alfalfa seed for the world, and about 50% of the alfalfa seed produced here in the United States was exported around the world. And when they introduced Roundup Ready Alfalfa there, we knew that all of our alfalfa would eventually be contaminated with the Roundup Ready gene. And so we were exporting some seed to New Zealand. When Roundup was first released here in the United States, New Zealand moved very quickly to set restrictions on it. They had a zero tolerance for any genetically modified material in any crop. And they set up rules that if you ship seed in there and it tested positive, then it would have to be sent back home. And we couldn't take the chance of sending any more seed down there under those conditions. There was no way we could guarantee that we would not be contaminated. So my New Zealand business went away.
Talk about I read the studies that you did about the feral alfalfa. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you discovered?
Well, in the beginning, USDA and Monsanto said, oh no, they can live side by side, that it won't cross-contaminate. Well, anybody that knows anything about pollination and the bees flying back and forth would know that that was false. But that's what they first came out with. And so we went to court over that in the Roundup Ready 1 case. They have finally admitted now, yes, that all the alfalfa is going to be contaminated, but they're going ahead with it, releasing it anyway. And I was at a meeting years ago with seed growers and the crop certification people, and the forage genetics representative got up and said, well, if you're producing seed for a sensitive market, maybe you should move outside the country to raise the seed. I don't know, such arrogance on their part. And I don't know whether the people in the room understood this, but I did. Right. And them telling me that I needed to shut down my business here where I had my farm and go to some foreign place to raise seed was just not acceptable.
Right, because, you know, I make the comparison that if you move into an area and you bring cattle with you and your cattle get out of your fenced-in area and they do damage to other farmers' property, well then you're responsible for that because your cattle did this damage. And yet the rules don't exist that way for cross-pollination, for genetic contamination of a seed stock or
no, the USDA's position is that if you want to be an organic farmer or the contamination would damage you in some way, that you have to take the measures to protect yourself, which I think is totally contrary to what is legally and morally correct. Right. If they want to move in and contaminate an area, they should be responsible for it.
Right. And because during the approval of the alfalfa, they did not complete the necessary environmental impact study in the timeline that they were provided, there's now a lawsuit with the Center for Food Safety, which you are a part of. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, there was Roundup Ready Alfalfa case to begin with, and the main thrust of what we sued for was to force the USDA to do a complete environmental impact statement of this and to study all of the side effects. Well, they made a report that was 1,600 pages long that contained a whole lot of smoke and snow and did not get down to the really important issues. One of the important issues with Roundup Ready Alfalfa is how much glyphosate is going to end up in the milk that people are drinking. when they go out to the Roundup Ready fields and spray them with glyphosate. They did not do that. I think that is probably the number one concern that people should have, is how much increased glyphosate is going to be in the milk they buy in the store. They did not study this. They did 1,600 pages of information that wasn't relevant to this, and it was just to try to mind boggle anybody who read it. And most of the news reporters who they didn't bother to study it. They just looked at it, oh, this is the most extensive environmental review that has ever been made. And that was what made it out to the press, and that's what everybody believed. But that was nothing but a big smoke and mirrors job that they did. And now we've got it in the Ninth Circuit Court, and I think the judges that have got it are going to be able to understand it. Now, we won the case in the Supreme Court, and they had to do the environmental impact statement. One of the things that we won in Roundup Ready 2 case in the Supreme Court was that if we thought, or if the environmental impact was not accurate, that we could go back to court again, and that's what we did.
And through this process, through this whole process from you losing your export business all the way up to taking this issue to court, and being a big part of the Idaho farming community, can you talk a little bit about, and I know we've had this conversation before, and it was just really powerful to me, what this issue, what the GMO issue has done within the farming community and to the farming community as a whole in your relationship with each other and other farmers?
Well, our main business was raising alfalfa seed, and we had our own varieties, and we were doing very well. It essentially destroyed our business. We lost our export market. We had to fight this thing in court. It took an immense amount of time to do all this, and it destroyed us.
And then the other farmers around you who are growing the GMO alfalfa, who are probably unwittingly a part of what happened to your seed business. I mean, certainly they didn't set out to ruin your alfalfa. Your fellow farmers, that wasn't their goal, but it happened.
Well, yes, and most of them were just raising it on contract for the other seed companies, and from year to year they would raise alfalfa, and then if there was another crop that was more valuable, they would do it. So it didn't affect them as much,
right,
other than they lost the options, a lot of them, to raise alfalfa seed.
Right. And you've said before that the farming community is kind of split down the middle on this issue, with one side who want to use it and like using the Roundup Ready technology and the GMO seeds, and the other side who are trying to stay conventional and traditional seed and to not get contaminated. And it must be really difficult to actually work together, because the two kinds of crops can't coexist.
Yeah, well, it's created an awful lot of stress among farmers. I've got some people out there that are extremely angry with me because I on Monsanto, and then there's others that are very supportive. The supportive people were worried about the economics of their farming, and they wanted to raise seed, and they wanted contracts. They didn't care what the biggest one of contracts to raise seed. So they didn't figure that it would affect them as much. They just continue raising seed. But the point of it is that because we lost this export market, then there wasn't as many contracts for farmers out there. And so they lost their seed. And many of those people who were raising quite large acreages are not in the business anymore. And if you drive out across the country here, and can remember what it was like 10 years ago, there's very small amount of alfalfa seed moving.
Right. And you just don't see a lot of workers in fields anymore. Obviously, they are spraying rather than having people in the field. So a lot has changed as far as all of that. So.
I'd like to talk about the advantages of Roundup Ready Alfalfa compared to the costs or the damage that it's done. Roundup in agriculture or in the hay raising business, the forage raising business, only about 17% of alfalfa fields were ever sprayed with a herbicide. Alfalfa is one of those crops that you can raise without herbicides. And I think that's great because the hay came off those, goes to the cows, it's not going to be contaminated. If there was a weed control problem, there's about 20 different other chemicals that can be used to control weeds in alfalfa, and many of them, there's no residue in the hay when they get done. So the need for it was very low. It was just for somebody that was farming marginal land out on the end of Buzzard Point and hadn't controlled his weeds that it might be some advantage for. The disadvantages are that it destroyed half of the U.S. alfalfa seed industry, plus it's going to end up with all of this glyphosate in the milk that people eat. The advantages are so small compared to the damage that is done that it's incredible that the USDA allowed Monsanto to do it. But what I think it shows is just how much control Monsanto has over the USDA.
That's true, and I've also recently learned about how seed salesmen participate in a program called Roundup Rewards, and the higher percentage of their sales that are Roundup Ready, the larger the bonus they get from Monsanto. And having spent 10 years in corporate America myself in the banking industry, I know that when customers would come in and talk to me about what kinds of accounts they needed, they would come to me thinking that I'm just talking about what kinds of accounts they needed. What they didn't know was that I've received a lot of training and I get bonuses for selling certain types of accounts. And so I've never worked in the seed industry, but having learned about the Roundup Ready Rewards or the Roundup Rewards program, I have to assume that there's some similarities there, that when a seed seller is selling a farmer's seed, there are other things at play besides just what the farmer needs and the conditions that it's being grown under.
Well, the Roundup technology has been accepted, and it's had huge amount of promotion, and they talk about all the benefits. They never talk about the disadvantage. One example of this is that in almost all the articles and whatever talks, they say they put in there the high yielding genetically modified crops. And they say that so many times, and they put it in so many articles that a lot of people start believing. But that's absolutely untrue. They're not high yielding. They won't yield as well as conventional varieties. But they do make it much easier for a novice farmer to be successful raising a crop. You know, they can plant their corn, head for Canada in their Winnebago and call the co-op, go out and spray my corn with Roundup, and then you can come back in the fall and harvest the corn. It's made it so any idiot can grow a crop of corn. They don't have to go out and cultivate, they don't have to time things correctly, and so it's really been accepted. But what there has not been much publicity on is that technology is going to fail in a very short time, because Roundup doesn't kill all of the weeds. A lot of weeds are developing resistance to Roundup, and so when they get down the road a ways and this Roundup Ready technology is not working, then they're going to have a much more serious problem raising these crops using the other chemicals, because the new weeds that are going to invade the fields are generally perennial plants that are deep-rooted and extremely difficult to control. So down the road, raising corn or raising these crops that are going to be much more difficult. And there's going to have to be some good farmers come back to do it.
Right, and in fact, they already are starting to raise the bar with the chemicals that they're using to combat the problems that are showing. Because
well, yeah,
it's already beginning. The 2,4-D and combined with the Roundup Ready technology.
Now they're tank mixing Roundup with a lot of other chemicals to try to hold off this inevitable thing that's going to happen. And so that is all going to result in the use of more chemicals in the long run.
Right, chemicals to solve problems that chemicals caused.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Is there anything else you think we should?
Well, I think that one of the important things that consumers should know, and that is what genetic engineering is. Now, way back in the 1980s, a bunch of genetic engineers, they had a conference, and they came up with the decision that genetic engineering was substantially the same as conventional. But that is absolutely untrue. In conventional plant breeding, you don't take a gene out of some other species and introduce it into your new plant. Now, with the genetic engineering, they go to a totally foreign species, pick up a gene, and bring it back and put it in there. And that gene results in different proteins in the crop they raise. I've been told that on alfalfa, and I've read this a couple of places, that 0.25 of 1% of the proteins in Roundup Ready Alfalfa are different. And if you take stacked corn where they got eight-way stacked corn, the simple arithmetic would tell you that 4% of the proteins in those are different. And what proteins you eat is very important. And I don't want to, when I buy food, I'd like to know if it's had some change in it, whether it's got these foreign proteins, because I'm allergic to quite a few things. I like to know when I eat something, if it causes problems for me, that I'll know to avoid that food. On this genetically modified stuff, they're going to have you eat it. They're not going to tell you what's in it. And if you do have a problem with it, you will not be able to identify what the problem is. The other thing that I think is really important is how they do the genetic engineering. Now, they've gone through a number of processes, but I think the current one is to attach the new gene that they want onto a virus, and they select a virus that is particularly good at penetrating a cell wall and carrying the new gene in. And I talked to somebody who had been in the genetic engineering business a long time ago. He was extremely concerned about this, and I think this is a very serious thing. You don't want viruses that can penetrate your cell walls. That just to me seems very basic. But the USDA and Monsanto tells us we're going to eat it. If we don't, even if we don't want to, they're not going to tell us about it, and all of this. I just don't want to eat food that is laced up with these they're prion-type viruses that were selected to penetrate cell walls.
Yeah, and they add the antibiotic-resistant marker gene into that entire process so that they can see if it was successful, so that once it's done, they wash the whole slide in antibiotics, and whatever lives through the antibiotics is considered success and becomes the source for our seed. So, yeah, I think it's a really important aspect to really understand the process.
One of the things that the general public has not received correct or good information, because all of the farm magazines depend on advertising to survive, and they are afraid to write any articles that are derogatory or negative on genetic engineering, because they lose their advertisers then, because Monsanto now owns the bulk of the seed business, and they depend on Monsanto buying, and their Monsanto connected companies buying the advertisement. So the whole truth about genetic engineering is not being told to the general public.
Yeah, and I heard something to the effect that many of the countries that are part of the United Nations, I believe it is, or the International Monetary Fund, if they say anything bad about biotech, it really severely impacts their situation as a country and what kind of ramifications they're going to get for saying such a thing.
And the United Nations feel, I was just reading on their website, they feel very, they're very torn right now because they tried to provide food to hungry nations, and they get food from all over the world to send to hungry nations. Well, there's hungry nations all over Africa that won't accept genetically engineered food. And so the United Nations tries to walk this line between providing food and respecting the receiving country's desires not to have it be genetically modified food. And I think that's a statement in itself that nations who are on the brink of starvation will decline accepting this food. So
very big statement.
Right. Yeah, because the information is available there and it's not available here, and that's why we continue to work for labeling and educating, and that's why we do videos like this.